All right, I'm gonna find a seat and a drink.
Right on.
Are y'all people are still slowly coming in? Do y'all want to go ahead and get started? You want to wait? How do y'all feel about it?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to South by Southwest Online XR. This is our first live panel here in the beautiful contemporary Austin rooftop. Thank you so very much. Thank you all for joining us and for really taking the time and energy to participate with in the community here at South by Southwest and in the XR community. Thanks to all of our partners, of course, and thanks to Vroom and the whole team behind putting this all together. I can't thank everybody enough from both the South by Southwest team that has been putting all their blood, sweat, and tears into the whole event, and the Vroom team who really has done just an outstanding job making this all happen. Well, y'all are here for the making of Reeducated, a New Yorker documentary. So please welcome to the stage our moderator, Laura Mingale / Laura Canada, who is the founder of Archetypes and Effects and a contributing writer for Upload VR. Please take it away, Laura.
Amazing. Hey guys, thanks Blake. It is such an honor to be invited to moderate this panel about the New Yorker's VR film Reeducated. Reeducated is a first of its kind documentary. It's based on more than a dozen hours of interviews and some incredibly in-depth research as well. It's having its world premiere here at South by Southwest, and the experience takes viewers inside a re-education camp in Xinjiang, China. It's guided by the memories of 3 former detainees. So joining me here, please welcome the film's director, Sam Wolson, as well as producer, Ben Mauk. Excellent. Let's take a seat. So thanks for being here. Let's start with a discussion among the 3 of us, and like Blake mentioned, we'll open it up for questions with the audience right after. So Ben, let's start with you. Reeducated is part of a major multimedia project from The New Yorker. Can you tell us about the purpose of the project and what's new about this reporting?
Sure, yeah. So, I've been reporting on this region, kind of the Central Asia, the border of China and Kazakhstan for a few years, since 2018. As you may know, Xinjiang is China's westernmost region. It's the largest region, has a large population of Turkic and Muslim minorities, more than half of the population. And in recent years, there has been a rise of a kind of security state and surveillance state in this region that has seen roughly 1 million people put into these kind of extrajudicial internment camps and several other forms of kind of securitization and surveillance, including kind of show trials and forced labor, sort of the rendering illegal of kind of normal cultural and religious practices, things like that. So for a few years, I've been collecting interviews from that region. I've been traveling in this area, meeting with people who were themselves detained in these quote unquote re-education camps, or who were, they might have had family members who disappeared in these camps, or who received long prison sentences for kind of intellectual or cultural or religious work. So what's new about the reporting that we did in December 2019, from which this film emerged, is that we actually sat down with 3 men who had been detained in the same camp at the same time. Now, there's probably close to 50 people who have gone public about their own kind of firsthand eyewitness experiences in these camps.
Wow.
However, it's very rare to get several people who were in the same camp to be able to kind of cross-corroborate their experiences. You have multiple people who can say, this is what the classes were like, this is what we learned, this is what our cell looked like, that kind of thing. So one thing that's new about this reporting, both the interactive project, which is on the New Yorker's website, and the film, which are kind of 2 halves of this project that we all collaborated on, and Matt's art is kind of the visual basis for both of those projects. part of what's new is that we had three men who were talking about these overlapping experiences of detention, and they got to know each other in these camps. They're able to talk about their relationships and how they evolved. So sorry if I'm rambling right out of the gate, but that's sort of one
That's
element
not rambling
that's
at all,
new
but
about
I'm
that,
really
yeah.
curious. What made you decide, this is a first for the New Yorker, what made you decide to get into VR for this story?
Yeah, so Sam and I actually knew each other because we both lived in Berlin. We're both journalists there, and I'm actually like an extremely low tech person and low tech journalist, and I mostly do kind of print magazine writing, sort of investigative reporting. And Sam is an immersive film director, and I knew that he had shown me some of his previous work on kind of the war in Sudan and the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster, and had kind of won me over as to the power of this technology to kind of bring viewers into a space that they can't access. And I mean, this is actually a really powerful journalistic tool for kind of a specific genre of story where it's very hard to get into the region, where you can't necessarily take videos or photos, these kind of black box areas that can also be really advantaged, or the stories can kind of be advantaged by having this kind of empathetic narrative format. And so,
You want to
so
see?
Sam had kind of convinced me of the virtue of that, and this to both of us kind of appeared like a perfect case study for a project like this, because Xinjiang is an extremely difficult area to report from. You, as a foreign journalist, you do not have free access to spaces there. We couldn't go to this particular camp and interview people in it, of course. And foreign journalists have been harassed and detained and kicked out of the country quite a lot in recent years, often related to reporting efforts on Xinjiang. So this was a case where we had this kind of unprecedented firsthand testimony that went into far greater detail about the world of these camps than anything that had ever come out of the region. And we had, multiple men who were kind of willing to go on the record and who were actually very insistent on going on the record and on getting their stories heard. And yeah, we thought this is a great opportunity to use this technology. Yes, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just to add in, a big part of this that made it so suited to VR was that we were reconstructing spaces. And when we had these, as Ben mentioned, when we had these three overlapping narratives, we could actually cross-reference a lot of the details in these environments, or a lot of the actual experiences that these guys had. For instance, if you've seen the film, the scene in the yard where they're being transferred from one camp to another, this is something that we had, all three of them experience, and we could kind of use all of their experiences to build what that looked like. The same for the cell. We could ask, where were you sleeping? Where were the beds? How far apart were the beds? What did the cameras look like? What did the chairs look like? And all of this sort of was really, part of what made this, truly, suited for VR, because we were trying to represent space, trying to represent sort of a forbidden architecture and a forbidden environment. And,
Yeah.
Definitely, and I'd love to get
the
in.
spaces are themselves what's newsworthy about. Part of what's newsworthy about the story is just accessing these spaces.
It's absolutely incredible. It's definitely a powerful experience that everyone here should be checking out at South by. And what I found interesting is you didn't just do this in VR. You've extended your stories into the interactive web experience. Can you talk about how you decided what parts of the story would go in VR versus the interactive web experience?
Oh, in the world.
Sure. So Sam and I had envisioned from the beginning that this would be a story that had kind of multiple, what would you say, kind of would exist in multiple formats, because VR was kind of the ideal situation for showing the spaces of these camps, but VR has a limited audience, and the New Yorker would obviously, they were really interested in this project but wanted something that could reach kind of all of their subscribers as well. Even, aside from kind of the New Yorker, we knew that there were just elements of the story that would work very well in VR, and then elements that were kind of outside of the spaces of this camp that we could kind of treat in another way. So while we were in Kazakhstan that December doing these interviews and kind of traveling to these different villages near the border where people lived who had come out of Xinjiang as asylum seekers or as migrants. We collected these three kind of primary testimonies from these men, and we interviewed them and re-interviewed them. But at the same time, we were meeting with other people who had been held in other camps or who had been sentenced to some kind of forced labor. We met people who had kind of live-in party cadres come to their house and kind of instruct them on sort of party discipline and kind of secular sort of normative Han practices. So we had this kind of panorama of stories that we also wanted to tell. So that's where the idea for this interactive came out of. And I mean, we really were building both of these projects kind of in tandem over the course of last year. Matt did drawings that were kind of bespoke drawings just for the interactive. Sam took photographs that appear exclusively in the interactive to kind of as sort of part of this epilogue where you actually kind of see the faces of the people that you've been hearing about, and we sort of interwove these stories together. The centerpiece of the interactive is still the Reeducated, this camp in Tacheng, and we used a lot of the assets from the film in kind of a scroll-based environment, so that visitors to the site can still kind of see these spaces and they can scroll back and forth and sort of simulate some small fraction of this kind of like VR experience. But yeah, that's kind of where we had a lot of stories to tell, and we knew that some were suited for VR and some weren't. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. So I mean, for the film, I think how many different people do we feature in the interactive? There's like 7 or 8.
Yeah,
there's a lot. There's a lot more people in the interactive that we're sort of doing a sort of a larger snapshot of what's happening across Xinjiang. In the film, it's much more of an emotional. Even though we sort of went through this painstaking effort to build the architecture and the spaces and sort of get all of the details correct, it's more of an emotional journey, and that's something that's a lot different in a VR filmmaking context than it would be in sort of a web interactive where we're going through maps and we're going through a historical context. And VR filmmaking is just not really made to absorb information in the same way that you're going to spend a half an hour reading an article. So it was pretty clear when we were developing this, what kind of things narratively are going to work in a VR context and what kind of things are going to work in a web interactive where you're interfacing with a screen in a different way than in a VR headset.
Interesting. So you definitely use the benefits of each medium to help to elaborate on the story and what's been happening. So Sam, I'm curious about your first thoughts. So Ben and you have a relationship, but looking back to that first moment when you guys decided to explore doing this story, what were your first thoughts about how it could come to life?
Yeah, I mean, when Ben and I initially started talking about this, I was in some ways really skeptical because I know how hard it is, how expensive, how technically challenging it is to do VR projects, and you really need, and it really also needs to be the right story to tell in VR. Not every story is a good story to tell in VR. So when we were initially talking, it took a while to sort of figure out what we had discussed earlier, that these three overlapping narratives that could help us reconstruct architectural space and sort of follow the emotional journey. It took a while to get to that point. So initially I was sort of looking for the thread that really cried for this to be a VR project.
Interesting. And then actually right before the pandemic, you and Matt Huynh, who's actually in the audience, I see back there, you flew to Kazakhstan for your interviews. How did you decide on the artistic style for how the reconstructed memories would look for visitors in VR?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this was something, when Ben and I were conceiving of this, a lot of the reporting up to this point was based on, leaked documents, sort of other sorts of single testimony narratives,
satellite images, or like
satellite
3D reconstructions,
which are all really incredibly important and sort of built the body of work of what we know about this. But it's sort of a very distancing way to understand this material. So we really wanted to find a way, an art style that would be both lyrical and human, but also descriptive. And Matt's style, once New Yorker helped us find Matt and introduced us to him, and his style just sort of spoke to sort of that exact balance between descriptive and human and beauty and lyrical between all of those spaces. And it was something, this is ultimately a piece about using reconstructing memory. And that's a big part of the film, is sort of these the way that these spaces are built around you as a viewer. And Matt's style again really spoke to that. So this sort of like black and white, inky, sort of very lyrical aesthetic was something that was there from the very beginning, and we were just lucky enough to find an artist who could really sort of bring that whole humanity to this project, and I think make it accessible in a more emotional way than a lot of the previous materials had been able to do.
Definitely. And can you elaborate? I noticed some subtle differences between the look of collective memories and how those were brought to life, and also of individual memories. Can you elaborate on the style differences?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, as we were talking about earlier, a lot of these spaces in the film are really meticulously built. So, for instance, in the cell, which is one of the early spaces that's constructed around you and that is described by the detainees, is something that was researched, and how, like I was mentioning earlier, how far is everything, how big was the room. And a lot of the narrative that you hear in there early on is also a bit more descriptive, because it's a really important part of revealing what this was, sort of the mundane aspects of what life was being, trapped in these camps. But you'll see if you watch the film sort of over the course of it, you'll notice sort of a stylistic change, right? And that this was something we it took us a long time to figure out how to balance these two sort of art stylistic modes, let's say. But the stylistic change goes from this more descriptive, cross-reference, you know, aspect of the storytelling to something that's a little more expressionistic, something that's a little bit more of a reflection of the internal emotions of the people that we were interviewing over the course of the project. So you'll see it, for instance, in the cell. There's a scene. They're describing, they sing the national anthem. They have to eat. They have to study. But then there's a moment where two of the detainees, Yerbaket and Orenbeck, had this really personal, emotional moment where Yerbaket was giving Orenbeck a bun, and you'll see the light change in the room, and the buns start glowing, and it become a more expressionistic sort of rendering of what they experienced. So we sort of move between those two modes of visual styles throughout the film, where there's a surgery scene where Yerbaket had this surgery that he unfortunately was not given the proper anesthesia during the surgery, and was being operated on while he was without anesthesia, awake. And this is an incredibly expressionistic sort of rendering of that experience. It's the emotional expression of the experience. So yeah, this was something, it took a long time to figure out how to balance these sort of like emotional world building versus the really meticulous sort of cross-reference environmental world building and storytelling that we did. And Ben, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. I'll add just two things. One is that, that this is absolutely true, everything that Sam says. And additionally, we just wanted to figure out a way to visually signify to the viewer these moments that they should take kind of very, like, as kind of journalistic, very strict reconstructions. And so we tried to keep the style fairly buttoned down for them. And those are also the scenes where the sources are actually kind of describing the environment, like the cell and the classroom. And we wanted to somehow visually signal this change. And I think a lot of these decisions ultimately came out of having such a versatile and talented artist as Matt, who could kind of handle these different styles, and who also has a lot of experience illustrating and kind of creating narratives that are about these kinds of subjects, about asylum and migration, and he's very good at not kind of making a kind of overly dramatic or melodramatic, kind of ostentatious, kind of heartstring pulling thing. He's very skilled and very subtle, and so the fact that he was able to kind of develop these different modes is why we were able to use them.
Well,
I think we a lot of it came out of just the artist, the artist ability, and that we sort of like our kind of decision making.
It's that, but then also, Nick Rubin, who's the lead animator in his animation in his studio Dirt Empire. I mean, Matt had the art that he was hand drawing. Every single surface and frame that you see in the film is Matt's hand drawn assets that were, done with ink on paper, scanned, and then put into a computer and brought into Cinema 4D. And then Nick basically and his team bringing these and actually bringing them to life and building worlds out of them. So despite it's sort of this collision between incredibly low tech, earliest ways that we're depicting, representations of things mixed with some of the most high tech digital storytelling tools that Nick and his team were using, things where we're actually doing real light rendering in these things, where you have light is actually bouncing off of these things in spaces and creating realistic light simulations. So it was both on Matt's part, but also on Nick's part to help us build that sort of, let's say, like film noir, German expressionistic aesthetic with these really cutting edge lighting techniques, and sort of the marriage of those things together that brought the aesthetic to life.
It's absolutely incredible. And I heard, what was it, 4,000 drawings that were done?
Oh, yeah. It was something like that. We recently were talking about this for another behind the scenes thing, and yeah, it was several thousand.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And Ben, if you can dive a little bit more into how the team collectively worked with the former detainees to recreate their realities, I find that background quite interesting.
Yeah. So we interviewed we had these three subjects of the film that we interviewed at length to kind of walk through the experiences of their detention, which is difficult to do. And I've done a few dozen of these interviews, and they can be kind of re-traumatizing for the person who went through these experiences, and they're often pretty emotionally charged. We were really lucky that the protagonist of the film, kind of the main subject, Yerbiket, was extremely affable and easy to talk to, and he sat down with us for 6 hours one day, and then I think like 3 or 4 hours another day, and basically the way we structured these is we had them kind of chronologically describe everything that happened to them in Xinjiang on this. I mean, often they told kind of a little biography, which you get a little bit more of in the article. You get more background of some of the characters. But, we had this chronology, when were you detained? What happened? Where did you go next? Where did you go next? Were you taken for a medical checkup? Were you taken? So we walked through, up until they were released back into Kazakhstan. And this would take several hours. And often we would stop and kind of go through, okay, can you, describe the classes a little more in greater detail? Or, and, some of these descriptions, we wanted it to be very repetitive. We wanted to hear, we were happy to hear the same thing from all three guys, because then it meant we could easily kind of cross corroborate, for example, the content of the classes, where they learned how to about the dangers of Islam and stuff like that. In other cases, they had events that happened only to one of them, like Ricketts surgery, which we include in the film, was kind of one where Ornbeck remembered Yerbiket being taken away for the surgery and then coming back to the cell, but this was kind of a unique event. And so the film kind of reflects these repetitive, kind of common events and these unique events. And once we had finished doing this kind of chronological work, we would actually sit down and talk about these spaces. And here Matt would often take over and say, hey, could you kind of walk me through this space? And something that we developed while we were in Kazakhstan that we realized was actually a very valuable way of getting usable recordings about these spaces is that we would say, okay, imagine that you're standing in this cell. What do you see in front of you? And the detail, okay, I see a door. What's the door like? Well, it's made of metal. It has bars. what else do you see? Oh, there's a security camera on the right. And we would kind of walk them through their own kind of like virtual memory of these spaces. And we would do it for the classroom. We did it for many, many spaces that aren't in the film, obviously. We chose kind of 3 or 4 of the most, the most narratively satisfying spaces for the film. But we really sat down, and Matt would sketch out these floor plans, and he would show them to our interviewees, and the interviews comment on them. Yes, this was the window, this was this here, and so that could often take up half of the interview time, just kind of going over these almost every space that they discussed with us.
Wow. And let's talk about with all of the interviews that you guys did. Let's talk about how you made some choices. So you've covered stories from some of the most reputable media in the world. So you've covered them for New Yorker, of course, New York Times as well, just to name a few. And in your writings, usually the voice of the journalist is often present in some way, but in Reeducated, the core voice is both literally and figuratively the former detainees. So how did you decide on what parts of their voice were integrated into the experience? And did you go in originally intending for the experience to be about 20 minutes? So Ben
sure.
or Sam.
Yeah, I can answer the first one, and then the second one I can answer, and then maybe toss to Sam.
Yeah.
We always intended for this to be to highlight and to amplify the voices of these witnesses and these victims and these survivors of this rise of the security state in Xinjiang, both the interactive and the film. The interactive is also, I'm kind of minimally invasive as a journalist in that piece. And before this project, the previous project I did was an oral history about Xinjiang's mass internment drive, and that's where I met one of the 3 subjects of the film, and that is all their voices. Because with a subject like this, where we're talking about kind of a human rights catastrophe where atrocities are taking place, I feel that I, as a journalist, have very little analysis to add, and that the best thing that I can do is put myself in a situation of gathering this evidence and presenting it for readers to read, and then kind of make their own analyses and their own judgments about. And that's definitely what we wanted to do with this film. We wanted to present, what obviously there's a lot of kind of subjective narrative decisions that you have to make, but we wanted to present the voices of these 3 men, and that's one reason that one thing that I was really insistent on from the start is that you hear the Kazakh voices in the film. It's not just, there's an English voiceover, obviously, but beneath the English voiceover, you can always hear the voices of these 3 men, and it is their voices. And I think it does lend a kind of journalistic vitality to the project that wouldn't be there if you were just hearing voice actors. So I guess that's my answer to that. In terms of the length, this definitely became much more ambitious as we after we gathered these interviews, and when Sam and I were kind of putting together. I want to say maybe 8 or 9 minutes we had kind of originally envisioned it as, but then we quickly realized that there was no way to sort of convey these stories in that time, and it just, Sam, you can elaborate, I guess.
I mean, in terms of was the question about the length of what was the question?
Yeah, just
Right.
I mean, it sounds like you initially intended to keep it around 8 minutes, and it's 20 minutes, and it goes by fast because it's so powerful and engaging. So just wondering how you made certain decisions in terms of what to include and how long to make it.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, initially it was going to be about half the length, and as we started building the piece, we realized, we need, we need another moment here. We need a breath here. We need this. This isn't clear how this. We transitioned from here to here. We added. There was probably 3 or 4 scenes that we ended up adding halfway through production because narratively they either made things more clear or it felt like it was sort of just a necessary cathartic moment that needs to be added, sort of let's say the poetry of bringing in those extra moments of just being talked at for 20 minutes in VR is a really challenging thing from a storytelling perspective. So you need these moments of silence, you need these moments of contemplation, but you also need moments of like narrative clarity. So we started out with our main sort of scenes that we knew. We had the cell, we had the classroom, we had the transfer. These were sort of our big building block scenes. And then within those, we started adding in other things that would bridge those and sort of narratively take us from place to place.
Interesting. And I'd actually like to dive into agency. So visitors to Reeducated watch with no agency as the story unfolds. And I'm just wondering, was the decision to offer no agency tied to the feeling that you wanted to get across? Sam?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question, and in terms of 360 filmmaking, I think often it's sort of seen as in some ways an inferior thing to sort of like fixed off projects and a more limited way of storytelling. And to me, as someone who's been working in this space for a little bit of time now, I always try to look at the limitations of 360 as sort of a storytelling device. So for this story, for instance, the fact you're limited to sort of like being able to be in a space, you'll feel like you're present in a space, but you can't move, you can't interact with anyone. This really sort of brings you into the emotional journey of what these three detainees were going through, this sort of Kafka-esque dystopia that they're thrust into. They have no agency, they're stuck. They literally cannot leave this place. They're being forced to listen and watch. So like removing that agency or building a project around the limitations of what you can do in a 360 video really lended itself to the story that we were trying to tell in this context.
Interesting. And you've obviously had a handful of high-profile immersive experiences that you've had a hand in the past. What did you learn from those past experiences that you created that helped when working on Reeducated?
Theoretically, I should be learning things in every project, I guess.
Great answer. Yeah.
Theoretically, no. I mean, it's interesting though. I've the last project I did was about the Fukushima and the nuclear meltdown, and it was really, really experimental. It had no voiceover, it had no linear narrative. It was 360 stereoscopic video, and it was all about sort of trying to think about what documentary could be in a 360 in a 360 medium in a new way. In this project, we I think I learned a lot from that one about what sort of storytelling techniques worked, trying to hone, building spaces that are sort of a combination of like, we really want you to be paying attention over here versus, here's an environment for you to freely sort of roam around and you're going to find meaning in any direction that you're looking in. And I think, it's sort of a ping pong between that throughout the film. And also like, the last film the Fukushima film was very much about emotions, very much about an intimacy. And in this film, I think I really brought some of that into it, where it's really about this, both in the art that we're making, the environments, about this emotional journey, and intimacy, but also in the storytelling and the way that, as you were mentioning, it's just through these voices. And I think this was something that it was sort of a hybrid of what I'd been learning on a bunch of my previous projects. And I think something else that we brought into this project, that just to add really quickly, is the sound design. For instance, I worked with John Brenson, who's also here, on the sound design for the Fukushima project. And the sound design in this, bringing in ambisonics and having that sort of be another tool in your arsenal in terms of leading people's attention around the space, either in a really direct way, like in the cell, where you hear a camera sound and you wanting to look at where that is and helping you find things in the environment, but in other moments where you're really just having this incredible sound bed that's just bringing you into a space in a way that's just really unique to ambisonic audio and I think VR and the combination of using those two things together. And John did an incredible job of basically every single sound that you hear in this film, with exception to the voices, is all things that he had to build, that we had to sort of construct between original score plus sort of building out, what does it sound like to be in a cell and with a whole bunch of people? What does it sound like when people are eating? What does a surgery sound like, but from a more expressionistic lens? These are all things that we had to spend a lot of time really meticulously sort of designing and tweaking so that it didn't go too far or the ambisonics wasn't too distracting. So that was something that was new that we brought into this project as well.
Wow, it felt so authentic, the way that it was all pulled together so seamlessly. So everyone here can access Reeducated. Its world premiere is now at South by Southwest. How will others be able to access it? Ben, can you elaborate? When will people be able to see? Yeah.
So on Friday, it will publish on the New Yorker's website, and the New Yorker will have kind of a dedicated page for the film that will also link back to this interactive that came out in February, and it'll have links to save it on your Oculus TV or watch it through YouTube. As of Friday, it will be kind of published to the public. And one other thing that we haven't mentioned is that we also convinced the New Yorker to publish the original, the Kazakh version of this film, which is to say the original recorded audio without the English language voiceovers. And that's something I was really excited about because it's so often the case that you take stories out of these spaces and you're not actually able to share this story with the sources and with the communities that are most directly affected by these issues. So the fact that the New Yorker was willing to kind of invest the resources in doing a Kazakh translation of all the text and then also kind of recut it. We had John kind of recut the audio together with our Kazakh audio engineer. That's something that I was just like so grateful for, that they were able to do that. There were a lot of things that I think were kind of unique and magical about this project, even as harrowing and as kind of somber a subject that it is. I'm just really happy that this everything kind of came together in the way that it did. So yeah, as of Friday, it will be public.
That's exciting, and it's thrilling. It will be thrilling for other people to be able to check it out. And I love that it's not only in VR, but it's accessible on YouTube as well, so people can watch it in 360, even if they don't have access to a VR headset, which is fantastic. So final question before I open it up to the audience for a Q&A time. Sam, I believe that all content should have a purpose and, of course, impact on its audience. And that's actually no matter if it's a game or a documentary. What do you hope that audiences will feel once they've experienced Reeducated?
I mean, I can say from my perspective, I think it's just, you hope with a type of project like this that people have an emotional connection with the story and ultimately want to learn more about the subject. And I think that's, really my hope for the project. And I don't know about you.
Yeah, definitely. Same.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely the same. Sorry, I have a weird audio delay going on.
No, it's okay.
I may be responding in an awkwardly slow way. I don't know.
Well, thank you guys so much. That was quite insightful. I'm going to open it up to our audience right now. If you do have a question, please raise your hand and don't forget to unmute. I will call on you. Does anybody have any questions? How's it going? Excellent. Is there anything else you guys would like to share? Just I guess a call to action to check it out. Oh, is there a question? I'm so sorry. Who who did you see?
Maybe I'm hallucinating. It's hard to tell.
Maybe just emote.
We have quite
emote some hearts if you have a question or something.
Yeah, that's a good. We have quite a interesting looking audience. Oh, I see. Right here with your hand, Dark Devil.
Later.
Dark Devil, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all,
Just
thank you very much. Do you hear me? Thanks very much.
yes, I
Pretty
can.
interesting. And I really like to see the movie. And my question is, where can I see it? Just a simple question, probably.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if in the festival, you go through the Vroom app, and you basically for this, if you want to watch it during the festival, you have to watch it through an Oculus headset, a Go Quest 2, and you'll basically click it and save it to your headset. And after the festival, there will be additional ways you can visit the New Yorker's website on Friday to learn more about that.
Excellent.
I think there's a few more questions actually.
Yes.
Unless I'm hallucinating again.
So just emoji hand. I'm just looking to see if there's any more questions or stand up if you
Thanks.
have. Thank you. Right
Oh
here,
yeah, this person back here.
Ebon Music. Oh, I,
Hello. Yep, there we go.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
I can hear
Hello.
you.
Thank you for
Hi.
being here. Really awesome conversation. And any advice for other content creators on how to, begin a project like this, or how to, build a team?
So maybe Sam, do you want to answer
Oh.
that?
Yeah, sure. Advice for other content creators doing projects like this. I mean, I guess, when I start projects, new VR projects, I'm always starting with something that I feel content-wise really strongly about. Because ultimately, you're gonna be, you know, not stuck, but you're gonna be working on this incredibly hard for maybe a year, maybe longer. You're gonna be asking for favors from people. You're going to be thinking about it all the time. So you really need that underpinning to be there. And from my experience, if you have that, if you have something you're really passionate about, you feel like is a story, idea, or something you want to express, then that's sort of the main driving factor behind you, finding other people who are interested. I think even on this project, I think just when we brought on and made our team bigger, a lot of it was through, talking to people about the story and people seeing how passionate we were and how excited they were to want to tell this story, And I think that's ultimately what makes for the best team, is something where everybody feels really excited about what they're doing. So I think it's got to kind of come organically from the start, from your excitement about what you're doing, that can kind of seep into the people around you, and then you'll weed out the people who aren't excited, but it's got to that's got to be there. I would say that's first most important starting point, and the rest is sort of technicalities of how do we do it, who's the person, how do we find the money. I mean, this stuff is just, you just got to figure it out, and try and try and try and fail a bunch, and then you make it work at some point. But you got to be passionate from the start about the idea.
Excellent. Great answer. I think that's it. Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for spending this time to chat about Reeducated. It's truly a powerful experience. Congratulations on your world premiere here at South by Southwest. Let's get a round of emojis.
Oh, thank you.
For Ben
Thanks
and
so
Sam.
much for having us.
Thank you.
A round of emojis.
Great. Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Interactive live performance